Okay, we'll get cracking. Dan, Catherine, welcome back to the podcast, and thank you for doing this now it's 9:13, so we're going a little late. For the audience, Dan and Catherine have both been on. Catherine's actually been on twice. She was on, you were on episode 35.
Wow.
And 403. Dan was on episode 405. I'll put links in the show notes to all of those episodes. Catherine runs Central Audio Archiving, and Dan runs audio archiving services. And they're both talking to me from Los Angeles in separate facilities because
there's no space for me in Dan's studio. There's tapes falling over onto him as we speak. So I had to go find another place. True. No, I'm actually at Elysian Mastering, which is where I've been working out of Pasadena. I'm working on some collections for reissue with Dave Gardner. So this has been my studio space for the past couple months.
We're going to do a super deep dive into what you two do. And please correct me if I'm wrong. Essentially, you both are in the business of restoration, archiving, kind of the two sides of that. Is that accurate, or do you think of it differently?
Well, the restoration part, it's mainly tape restoration, not digital audio restoration. So like I don't declick and depop the digital files. My thing is mainly like getting really messed up tapes and cleaning them up and making them playable again. So unfortunately, that's one of my main things. Yeah.
So Dan and I, this is, I think, something that's kind of interesting, are one of very few, if not, I don't know if there's anybody else that's doing archiving independently that is not a mastering engineer as well, like specifically. Yeah. So a lot of this work gets done by mastering engineers, and a lot of them are really, really brilliant. And some of them are restoration engineers, which are physical restoration, also digital restoration, which Jessica Thompson's a really good example of that. Brilliant restoration engineer.
And Mike Graves too.
Mike Graves, incredible. Yeah. So I am not, I don't get into the digital restoration too much. I do things if something needs to be fixed that's egregious, but for the most part, clicks and pops and Isotope gives me the heebs and the jeebs to look at it on a screen. So I let the professionals do that. But
yeah, and for Dan, you've done a couple rounds of recovery for me on AIT and DDS4 tapes.
Yeah,
that are like, in some cases, one of them was 20 years old, which was just a miracle of miracles that it was all there.
It's always a cross your fingers and hope for the best with those old tapes, and especially like the old SCSI drives. Some of them are just bricks. Some of the old tapes just, you have problems retrieving them. So, any of the old digital backup stuff is real tricky. So, well,
let's focus a bit right now on the analog, because I think that is the thing that you both have in common. Let's assume the audience doesn't know. Let's assume that they know a bit, but not enough. What are the most common situations you two encounter when somebody comes to you with a tape? Like, what are the conditions? Let's talk about that. The conditions of the tapes. What happens to tapes when they're stored in irregular ways or ways that they should not be?
Usually when a client comes to me with some tapes, first thing I do is just physically look at them, see if there's any water damage marks. Like you can see it, you can see water damage on the actual tape box, or on the tape itself, or if there's mold, or if there's dirt, or if it's covered in moths, which I've had before.
Spider webs. I've had spider webs.
Spider webs. Yeah. So it's just a physical examination first. A lot of times the tape looks great, and you won't know until you put it up on the machine what condition it actually is. First, I do a physical examination, pop it on the machine. I do what's called the Q-tip test, where I slow wind the tape and put a cotton swab on the inside where the oxide is, just for a few seconds. And then I look at the Q-tip and see if there's any black or brown markings on it, which is usually oxide. That's a good indication that the tape needs to be baked. So if I see the black or brown, I stop it immediately, put it in the oven, and then have to wait like usually a day or two and check it again, see if it needs to bake again. Once the tape is baked, or if it didn't need to be baked, You keep winding, you look for sticky splices, you look for sticky leader joints, and repair and fix or replace all of those. And then you kind of keep an eye on the tape and make sure there's no adhesion where the tape is fused to itself. We actually just had 6 reels of Bassif 900 from 1998, quarter inch, where the tape, as you get towards the hub of the reel, the tape started to become fused to itself. And so the oxide was fused to the backing of the tape that was packed against. And there's nothing you can do about that.
The adhesion is something that, I don't know if, Dan, if you're seeing a lot more of this in the last like 4 to 5 years than previously.
A lot.
So adhesion is a thing that's kind of like I don't know if I want to say it's like a newer problem, but it's
within the past 5 years. It's mainly Ampex 456 and 406, 2-inch from the 1980s. It used to be just the early 80s, then it was the early to mid 80s, and now I just had some reels from 89 that had it. So it's starting to come up over the years. And 10 years ago, we never saw this.
Yeah, this is something that, I mean, you could bake the tape for days and it's still going to have adhesion in the center.
So it's like vertebrae fusing.
Yeah, it's weird. We don't know what's causing it, but it happens closer to the hub.
Yeah, like the first minute to minute and a half, usually you'll see it. And then right when it's on the hub, it's like absolutely stuck. Like it'll just pull all of the oxide right off the tape.
And it starts on the outer edges and works its way down towards the center
Yep.
of the tape as you go farther in. And it starts as little pinholes of oxide and then gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's where it is physically, I'm assuming that it has something to do with the pressure being close to the center of the reel. So there's probably more pressure in the center of the reel than the outer parts of the reel. And then over time, it just fuses to itself.
Is it encompassing the whole circle of the reel itself, or is it just on the top if it was stored upright?
No, it's usually the whole reel. It's usually, like I said, starts at the top and the bottom edges of the tape. And then as you get closer to the middle, it works its way towards the center.
Yeah, by the time you get to the hub, it's the entire tape. It's the entire surface of the tape.
You're seeing patterns, it sounds like, in based on the years that you've been doing this. Like this is a new pattern that you're noticing.
Yeah, this is definitely something new that's come up in the last 5 years. I think it has something to do with the tape formulation and the pressure. And there might be a storage contingent too, like an environmental thing, if like a high humidity or like wide temperature fluctuations that might exacerbate it. But we really don't know.
We don't have enough experience with it at this point to really try to figure out what's going on. You know, like we don't have a lot of resources like in the chemical and sort of scientific world where people, you know, study this specifically. But this is a new issue. I mean, Matt, you know, to answer your question about like just general storage stuff for folks that don't know, humidity is a tape killer. There's 2 different kinds of analog tape. There's acetate and there's polyester. Now there's a myriad of different formulas of both of those types.
There's also Mylar.
Yeah, and Mylar too. So they have kind of the opposite problem is kind of how I look at it. Humidity for polyester tape, if it's stored in a humid environment or like a warm environment, you get something called sticky shed syndrome. And it's funny that they couldn't come up with a more fun name for that, but you can actually Google it. There's a Wikipedia page dedicated to it. And it's essentially, you know, you have 2 layers of tape. You have the magnetic layer, and then you have the backing. And in between those layers, essentially you have an adhesive that over time starts to break down, especially in human climates. It will break down over time, not in human climates, but it'll take much, much longer.
Yeah, it starts sucking moisture in from the environment.
And that adhesive starts to break down, and then what happens is that you start to get shedding because those layers are no longer like attached to themselves. So that's a problem. You also have leaching, which is a problem. And Dan does a Q-tip test. I'll do a Q-tip test depending, but like any polyester tape that's more than 10 years old, it goes straight in the oven for me. It gets baked.
So talk about the temperature of the oven, and is it any old oven?
No,
it's we use food dehydrators. So what we're basically doing is we're baking the moisture out of the tape. So over time, the tape sucks in moisture from the environment and the oxide gets sticky. So what we're doing is we're dehydrating it. So we use food dehydrators that you'd make like beef jerky or kale chips in.
We're always looking for the best ones too. We're always looking for the really specific ones that like have the right amount of shelves and the right temperature settings. And so Dan and I are always the ovens that Dan uses that I also use. They recently stopped making them. You can't. I don't know, Dan, if you can't get them. So then we had to find a different one.
Yeah, the weird Chinese brand that we were using.
Those were great.
They switched designs or something. But the ones we have are stainless steel with digital thermostats and digital timers on them. Normal analog tape, it doesn't matter if it's 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, 2 inch, 1 inch. I will bake for 15 hours at 135 Fahrenheit.
Very low temperature.
Very low temperature, low and slow like a brisket is how I always say.
Yeah.
You know.
Or you could just put it outside in Death Valley or Phoenix.
No. I've heard of somebody that used to leave tapes on their dashboard of their car.
That's bad.
To bake them
Too
and
hot.
leave it in a parking lot.
Too hot.
Horrible. I don't ever do that. But yeah, what we do is 135 for 15 hours. The food dehydrator is a controlled space. Then you have to let the tape sit for the same amount of time that you baked it. So
That's too cool.
15 hours, 135, let it rest for 15 hours. And that way the binder resets. And you know, after 15 hours of resting, check it again, see if you need to bake it again. Some tapes, you only need 1 bake. Some tapes, I've had to bake for weeks to get them to play. Some tapes never bake right.
Yep.
So those are the fun projects. Yeah, I've had just a handful of those where the oxide is like peanut butter and it will not bake. And so you have to capture 15 to 30 seconds at a time and then clean the heads and then go back a little bit and then capture another 15 to 30 seconds, clean the heads, go back a little bit. You can tell when you need to go back because all the high end disappears. So you're just listening for the high end. As soon as it disappears, you stop, clean the heads, go back, and do that for the entire length of the tape. And then digitally edit everything together.
Yeah, the first thing you lose when you have residue building up on your tape heads is high end. So you start to, all the high end of the recording starts to go out. And also, if it's a really nasty tape that has tones, when you're aligning, you'll start to see one side or another side start to drop because that oxide is building up. And with an alignment tone, it's super sensitive. So, you'll lose like a 0.5 dB and you're like, wait a minute, I just aligned, like you're live aligning it and losing a 0.5 dB and a 0.5 dB and a 0.5 dB, especially at 10K. But I've seen it. I just actually had a tape this evening that I did that had some buildup that I was losing at 1K. So again, like Dan said, that goes back in the oven, gets baked again. So it's not like a one size fits all process. And as far as temperature is concerned, not all the tapes that go in the oven go at the same temperature. Sometimes we have rainbow reels. So going back to our discussion about formulas with acetate, it's kind of the opposite problem, and it'll dry out and it'll start to cup. And the way that I try to explain it to clients is like, if you think about like a really dry, like, desert, like if you've ever watched like a nature documentary and you see like, during a drought, like the ground will just cup, if that makes sense, like in these little cups, because it's so dry. It just, same thing in theory is kind of the same thing that happens to acetate. Acetate's early. It's, Dan, 1960, when did they stop making acetate?
50s to 70?
To set, like I've had acetate go into like 78, 79, but after that, for the most part, unless somebody's really loves a formula and bought a bunch of it, is using it through the years. Polyester, that's the switch over polyester. So sometimes when you get master reels and I'm working on a project right now, a reissue campaign that it's a band that like really hit its peak in like between 78 and like 83. So we've got master tapes that, when they would cut records, they would cut, obviously before Pro Tools, they cut directly from the tape, from the 1/4 inch master or the 1/2 inch master, usually 1/4 inch, directly to the lathe. So they have to compile a master tape. So those are takes from mix reels that are all put onto one master tape. And that's, side A of the record or side B of the record, etc. So what you have is some stuff that might have been tracked a couple of years earlier, that's acetate, and some stuff that's later that might be polyester. So you can't just pop that reel in the oven because it has multiple formulas on it. You have to like bake it really low temp for a short amount of time, just enough to get the polyester off of it onto another pickup reel. And then, the acetate should transfer just fine if it's in good shape. And personally, it's my favorite because splices tend to hold up better. They were using lots of like horrible chemicals back then. Dudes in lab coats were making that stuff. And it's kind of built to last. And like the edit tape was built to last. So, getting like a monoacetate tape from like the early 60s is kind of a dream. The splices hold up. That's been my experience. But again, if you've got we call them rainbow reels because we've got all kinds of different colors. You can tell by looking at it, and shining some light through it.
There'll be bands of acetate and bands of polyester. And with the acetate, you have to hold it up to the light to check to see if it's acetate. If you can see through the tape, it's acetate. If you can't, it's polyester.
I can actually grab a rainbow reel right now and show you guys on camera if people would want to see that.
Let's give it a shot.
Yeah, it'll just be a second. But so anyway, when we bake those, we have to be really, really careful because essentially we have to remove the polyester from the reel and then bake it properly, transfer the acetate, and then recompile that reel back to how it was delivered so that we're, delivering it back properly the way it came. So yeah, I'm going to go grab that.
So Dan, up on my wall, I have a host of reels, metal reels of 2-inch tapes, 3M 996, Ampex 456, Quantigy GP9. I think I've got 499. Yeah, so I've got kind of like the Quantigy and Ampex and 3M in the 2-inch area, kind of semi-representative of, I guess, late 80s, 90s?
90s, yeah, more 90s. The only one that scares me out of that bunch is Ampex 456. That is notoriously bad for sticky shed. At this point, if I see 456, I don't care what year it's from, whatever, I put it right in the oven because I know it's going to be sticky. 499 has held up very well over the years. 996 has held up very well over the years. But then again, there's no magic tape formula. There's no like, oh, Scotch never has to be baked. I've heard that a bunch. That's a bunch of bullshit. I have baked every kind of formula, every kind of tape. It all goes bad at some point in time. And whether it's storage conditions or just it's deteriorating organically, there's always something wrong with every single formulation. I don't care what it is. So,
and when we talk about storage, what's the ideal scenario for analog tape?
Well, the ideal scenario, there's actually a place called Hollywood Vaults in Hollywood. It's an amazing storage facility, and it's made specifically for tapes. They keep it at 18% humidity and 45 degrees Fahrenheit. And they give you a parka when you go in there because, if you're in the vault too long, you start getting, kind of hypothermic. But it's a beautiful facility, and that's the ideal temperature and humidity is 45 degrees, 18% humidity. That's not practical. So I usually tell people wherever you're comfortable, humidity and temperature wise, that's probably, where your tape should be too. So do you want to be stuck out in a shed in the backyard, in the middle of summer? No, your tapes don't want to do that either. So that's, think about yourself when you think about your tapes. Where would I want to be? I want to be in air conditioning where it's not super humid. That's usually the best place.
Think about yourselves when you think about your tapes is like the best thing I've ever heard. That's great. All right. So this is a master, and I don't know if the lighting in here is awful. Sorry guys. But what we've got is, this is a compiled master. This section here is actually all live. This is a weird record that got put out. So we've got some singles, some live stuff, and I'm going to try to shine a light behind it. And okay. So see how down here, we have no light coming through. So that's polyester. And as we come up here, that's acetate. See? More polyester.
Wow.
And then if we get up here, that's polyester, that band right there, and then acetate. So this is a pretty egregious rainbow reel because we've got, what we'd love to have is the acetate on the outside edge because we can just transfer that and get it off of there and then bake the rest of it. So, but if it's layered in a way on the reel like this, not much we can do because just it's physical media. It has to play in one direction. So, but so yeah, that's how you know, by the way.
And Dan was saying that, there's no perfect tape formulation. It really comes down to storage.
I mean, there are some pretty bad formulas that just didn't hold up well. And then when you add poor storage to that, you get a tape like Dan was talking about earlier, where it's like it's like unbakeable, right? It's kind of like a combination of like all of these flaws at the same time, and you just get something that is, I mean, rarely we'll get a tape that we can't save. I mean, Dan's moved some tapes that looked like they were stored in a, toilet, like they're just awful, full of mold, like
probably were.
I know,
Yeah.
layers and layers of mold and like hundreds of hours of cleaning, and they play back once they're cleaned. They play back pretty well, So I mean, analog tape is pretty resilient. So it's rare that we get, or at least it's rare that I get a tape that I'm just like, if there's like physical damage, if there's tape stretching or the stippling, which are the little pinholes and the adhesion. Not much we can do about that. Or we just get a tape that's like poor storage, total shit formula over 30 years, 40 years, and that, it's
And
dead.
there were bad batches too.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
that was a thing.
Ampex
like
456.
not every
Wow.
batch of Ampex, or not every batch of 3M or Scotch was great. They had bad, there's a little bit extra something in there, and then nobody knows about it until 30 years later. And that batch of tape, is starting to act up. And there's so many variables involved that it's really hard to pinpoint exactly why this tape is doing this or that, or this formula is doing this. And, because like I said, it could just be one bad batch and the rest of the tapes are fine.
Let's talk about the problem. And I think I've had this conversation with you, Catherine, where basically the hardware to play this stuff back, there's where another problem lies, because people are getting older. All the smart analog people that, of the past are getting older and dying or retiring. And, you got to have heads, because heads wear out. You've got to have machines that work. So can you all talk about, maybe address some of those concerns that you all have that you're running into and, maybe just concerned about for the future?
Well, anything that's with analog media, and we can even go into some of the early digital stuff too, like DAT decks, etc. I mean, archiving in itself just naturally has a certain amount of obsolescence. And it's, the gaps between when these things were printed and when these things were, the height of the machines, the playback devices are so old now that we have just that. We've got, a lot of those guys, like, the Studer specialists, the ATR specialists, etc. I mean, let's be honest, most of them are no longer with us. And those guys were, they're techs, they're grumpy dudes, or they're busy dudes, or they're busy grumpy dudes, and I'm saying dudes statistically, but like people, and either didn't really have the time to pass on that knowledge, or like basically what it takes is for somebody to be really into that very specific thing and then annoy someone long enough to learn how to do it. And I think that goes for a lot of stuff in the audio industry that is kind of old school stuff, but yeah, I mean, it's a big problem. We don't have the techs we need. And I know for me, the biggest problem that keeps me up at night is head relapping.
Can you talk about what that is for those that don't know?
Yeah. Dan's probably got a better scientific sort of explanation of what that is. But I mean,
yeah, the heads get worn over time. So, after so many hours of play, the head actually kind of wears down. So if you have enough of the core left, it can be kind of reshaped to where there's no like flat spots on it where the wear was. And it's very, very scary work. It's very meticulous. If you go a little too much on, you're pretty much sanding the head to get it to reshape it. So if you go a little too much on one side or another, you can go too far and the head's ruined. So it's like I have John French and at JRF Magnetics do
we
all
all
my
do
head work. I just sent an email to him. I just got a new set of Studer 800 or 827 heads, 24 track, that I need him to redo for me. But it's one of these things where there's not too many John Frenches out there.
There's only one. If you look at any old deck, I'm going to say 80%, and I don't think that that's an over exaggeration of if you look at the head stack on that deck, and it could be anything. It could be an Atari, it could be like an MTR 10 or 12, which is the 1/4 inch model. It could be MTR 90, it could be a Studer, it could be an ATR, a lot of ATR heads, ATR 100 series. If you look at the head stack, 80% of those head stacks are going to have a sticker on it that says JRF Magnetics. I mean, this man has saved head stacks.
He's the best.
His entire career, and he's going to retire. I mean, Dan, is he in his 80s?
70s.
70s?
He's in his 70s. He's down to, I think, 3 days a week now.
So we're all like, somebody go and learn, you know what I mean? Like I've considered it. I think we've all considered it, but it's when John is no longer working, we're buying new heads, and then who's making new heads? And, there's a few other people who do some relapping work, but nowhere near to the specifications that John French does. The guy he's a miracle worker, a genius. Yeah.
Well, and aside from heads, I have like a lot of the old digital formats, like the 3348s and the Mitsubishi 1-inch 32 track and 1/4 inch 2-track machines. There's nobody, I can't find anybody that knows how to work on those machines.
I send all of those formats. When I get them, they go to Dan because there's not enough machines that run. I don't have any of those machines. I have a machine, it doesn't run. And
that's most of those formats. Yeah. I have several machines that are, the power supplies are screwed on them. There's something wrong with the cards or whatever, and there's nobody that can fix them. And I've talked to people all around the world, and everybody's having problems finding somebody that can fix them or finding parts, because a lot of the chips that we're using in these machines, we're talking 1985, 1988, those chips are long gone. And even on the secondary market, they're really hard to find if you can find them at all. A lot of the parts are just obsolete.
Really, really early analog to digital format. So it's like open reel tape machines that are using essentially 44/116, and some of them I think are 48. Am I wrong, Dan?
They're 44, 1, and 48, and they're 16-bit. There was a Sony 3348HR, which is 24-bit. But yeah, it's early digital, early converters, like 79, 80 is when the digital reel-to-reel started coming out. And it was basically like their biggest selling point was there's no tape noise. Because that was everybody's problem with tape, is the hiss. That's why we have Dolby, that's why we have DBX.
The technical term for those were Dash machines.
Sony was Dash and Mitsubishi was Pro Digi.
Okay.
Pro Digi.
And so there's that generation of machines. Then there's the whole generation of modular digital multi-tracks such as ADATs and DA88s from Alesis and Tascam, which used helical scan, almost like a VCR style transport.
It's a converted VCR pretty much. Yeah.
Okay. So, and you have the same thing with DATs.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about those 90s era MDMs and the DAT machines. Basically, the message that I was getting at one point was kind of like your pattern with the bonding on the analog tape on the Bass F900. The DAT tapes were going through a death spiral kind of moment from what I recall of this conversation. I could be wrong about that, but talk a little bit about those formats.
I'll let Dan talk a lot about DATs too, because he runs a ton of DATs and a lot of D88s, DTRS stuff. I do a ton of DATs, and I've found that certain formulas of DATs, Quantigy specifically over 60 minutes, are really problematic. It's like, I might be able to get 50%, 60%. The error rates are extremely high. The thing with those digital tapes is it's like yes or no. Basically, there's not a lot of room. Like if it's going to error, that's it. And if anyone's heard a digital error, it's not at all musical, and it's pretty bad. So DATs I've noticed that a lot of DATs are really problematic. I don't know if it's storage, but that DAT tapes are really, really thin. It's a thin formula. They don't hold up particularly well. They're not like audio analog tape. It's just like pretty much the same as a VHS tape. It's thin. Like if you ever try to put an old VHS tape in your VHS player and you've had some tracking issues, some sound issues, some problems, some dropouts, it's kind of the same thing. So you've got the media that's degrading faster, in my opinion, than analog media. And then, it's consumer. So that's kind of how that goes. And then you also have the decks that, the heads are starting to go bad. If you can't open up the deck and replace all the belts and clean the head properly, and you don't have a deck that has low hours, you're going to put that data in and it's going to error. Same thing with ADATs. So you really kind of have to be, in my experience, almost a tech in a way when it comes to those digital playback devices. I'll let Dan chime in on this too, because again, he's always running this stuff.
Nowadays, we're finding more and more issues with all the digital tapes. Doesn't matter if they're reel-to-reel or the MDMs or DATs. We're finding a significant amount of deterioration that's happening exponentially to where you'll just get random errors on the tape where it's just degraded. And it's, like I said, it's ones and zeros. So it's either there or it's not. So it's digital information. Whereas with analog, you're talking about magnetic fields, and sometimes you can pick up a little bit, but with digital tape, it's either there or it's not. So we're seeing that across the board with all the digital media. The machines, I know with the Tascam, DA88s, DA38s, 98s, 78s, you have to use them all the time. If they sit for a while, the lubricant that they used for the transports turns to cement, and that's when they start eating tapes. So you have to keep them moving all the time. That's one thing with the Tascams that we found. So as soon as I buy a new D88 or new DA98, I take it in to get serviced and have the entire transport overhauled and re-lubed, because that's an issue with it. So if you just have one sitting in a shelf for 15 years, do not put a tape in there. There's a high chance that it will just munch the tape. And, if you have a tape that you don't care about, put it in there and test it out. And it's the same with like some of the Panasonic DAT players. There's, all this stuff needs to be used. It's, we're talking about stuff with gears and motors. And so all the lubricated parts need to be moved a lot. So if it's just sitting on a shelf somewhere, there's a high probability that it's either not going to turn on, or if it does turn on, it's not going to work properly.
Those gears and those little parts in those decks, they're tiny and they're plastic, a lot of them. So they don't it's not like a tape deck where you've got, like actual moving motors with metal parts that are machined. You've got highly over manufactured pro-consumer playback devices that weren't particularly, they were expensive at the time, but it wasn't like buying a tape machine. So they made a lot of them. They made them quickly, and they used, consumer parts, which for the most part are plastic and, little rubber bands and gears and all that stuff in there. So they weren't really built to last for 30 years, 40 years, you know what I mean? So
is there somebody that repairs or DAT machines to this day? Is that possible?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's since they're kind of consumer, like a prosumer machine, there's still people that repair them. There are enough of them made because they're prosumer that there's still a decent amount of parts. We're starting to get towards the end of some of the parts for some of the models, but there's like 2 or 3 people in Burbank here that fix DAT machines and ADATs and D88s. And, it all depends on if the parts are available for them.
Wow. Which
on some things they're not, unfortunately. Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about the next generation, which was, essentially digital audio workstations. There's a couple of areas there that I'm aware of. You have your backup media like DDS, using retrospect or Mezzo. And then you also have the drives themselves. What are the things that you all encounter? And Catherine, I don't think you're doing much of that. If I'm correct.
Dan's going to have all the answers to those questions for sure.
One of the main problems that I'm seeing is Mezzo The problem with Mezzo, so Mezzo was used to back up software with. I think it came free with Pro Tools, and then you could buy it and do a thing. Mezzo, from what I've read, at some point in time, they changed their authorization to a email authorization, where you had every 6 months you had to email them and get a new authorization code to reauthorize your Mezzo software. Well, they went out of business. So if you have Mezzo software, there's a good chance that it's dead because you can't reauthorize it anymore because they stopped supporting it. So there's a guy in the UK, I forget what his name is, but he reversed engineered the Mezzo software. And as far as I know, he's the only person that can retrieve Mezzo tapes because he went through tons of code and reversed engineered this stuff so he can actually open up Mezzo sessions. So anytime I see something with Mezzo written on it, I tell them, contact this guy and be prepared to ship your tape to the UK to have him do it. So that's the biggest problem is just, some of the companies are just gone now.
Yeah.
Retrospect, thank God they didn't do that. It was just put in the serial number and your code and, you have a perpetual license for Retrospect. So you have to have different versions of Retrospect because some aren't backwards compatible. So like I have 6.1 and 5 point something and 4 point whatever. You never know what version of Retrospect was used for an AIT tape or DLT or LTO. And so you try it with Retrospect 6, it doesn't work. You try it with 5, it works. But that also means that you need a computer with Mac OS 9 on it. So you need Mac OS 9. And then for 6, you need 10, Mac OS 10. It's a bit of a nightmare trying to keep up with all the digital stuff.
What's the pattern you see with old ultra-wide SCSI drives?
Yeah, where you have the sled and you put them in the bay and you turn the key. They hold up pretty well. I've had a couple that were just bricks, just like any hard drive. Sometimes they just won't spin up. And it's sitting on a shelf for 20 years and, it's just not moving and you try and move it and nothing happens. So there's been a couple, that whatever I could do, I just couldn't get them to spin up. So at that point it needs to go to a data recovery center with, a clean room with people that know a lot more about taking those things apart than I do. And it's super expensive, but that's your best shot.
So I've had a couple of encounters with media. Here's some successes. DVD RAM, two-sided rewritable disc inside of a cartridge. I was successful in recovering one that was 12 years old. It had been sitting in my garage and somebody called me and said, hey, you have the thing? Yeah, I got the thing. Let me recover it. And I'll be damned. In that case, it was recovered in I keep gesturing this way because the DDS tapes are over here that I think you recovered for us, Dan. And I don't know if that is just due to media or storage or not. What's your experience?
Like with analog tapes, it's the same. It's both. It's, some media was made better than others. Like I've seen a ton of CDRs and DVDRs that are delaminating now. And it's just, they weren't built as well as some of the other ones. Or it's storage, if it's in a environment where the heat fluctuates quite a bit, you're going to get some weird stuff happening to your optical media. And it's the same with, tape-based backups like AIT, DDS, that kind of stuff. You have to bake those sometimes. They get sticky too. DATs, ADATs, D88s, all the open reel like 3348 and X850, all that stuff gets baked because it gets sticky. You get little pieces of metal particles on the heads and you get dropouts and you get errors and you get all kinds of stuff. So.
Okay. So a couple things that I'm drawing from things that you're saying, there's no perfect format. Analog seems to be fairly robust and if you give it some circumstances where it can survive for long periods of time in a properly controlled environment, you got a pretty good chance you're going to get your stuff off of it.
Yeah, more so than some of the like digital formats. Yeah.
I get this question all the time from folks that are like, what is the best place to put something? Like, what's the best backup media? And the only answer I have, it's not a good one, but it's based on experience and just time, is tape, analog tape. We don't know like what, we don't know like what hard drives are going to do. We don't have, we're having these issues with like early SCSI stuff and like this and that. And we don't know yet, So it's like, there is no perfect medium, but all we know is this stuff's been around this long. This is our experience with it, etc.
Yeah. From what I found, it's not necessarily the media, but the migration. Once you digitize something, keep moving it around. So as things become obsolete, like AIT drives and DDS drives and, SCSI drives, like move it. Keep moving the digital information around to a new media. And have multiple copies of it in different locations. If you're looking for longevity, that's the best way to do it.
Well, in the case of the Mezzo thing too, it seems that your decision-making about softwares needs to be thought through, because if there's some kind of goofy, like, who the fuck thought of like, oh, let's make them re-auth every 6 months?
Yep.
Like,
Yep.
To me, like, that's ridiculous decision-making on Mezzo's part.
Well, at that point in time, that's when everybody was cracking plugins and cracking software. So that's when they're like, okay, we need to stop this because people are cracking our software. So that's when they went over to the multiple authorizations through email.
People just don't allocate the time, and I'm one of those people that doesn't allocate the time of exporting the WAV files out of the Pro Tools session just to kind of say, sure, here's the Pro Tools session, but here's just the WAV files, just in case we don't have this and we have to move on to something else. That time taken and that foresight of what we need to prepare for the future, people just don't budget for it. People don't think about it until, 20 years later, you're like, oh, yeah, do you have that?
Yeah, technology moves at such an incredible speed. I don't know that people are thinking about, like you said, Matt, about, longevity. They're just thinking about what's super cool right now. You know what I mean? I think some people might be, but, so I don't know. That's an interesting thing to think about, is like, are we going to run into a specific type of longevity issue as we move quicker into the future of, technology here? So I don't know. I don't think it's the mindset.
Well, in Pro Tools specifically, and I know that other DAWs do a variation of this, but you can freeze your tracks and it actually generates another WAV file that shows up in a folder called rendered files. And I don't know if that's kind of like a quick and dirty solution or not. I would love to I should probably do a test where I freeze all the files and then pretend that the frozen files are the only files that exist and see if there's any issues with those files.
Yeah, that could be. I'm still on Pro Tools 12 because it works and I don't need plugins. I'm just transferring tapes. So I just need something that is rock solid, and I don't care about updates. I don't care about plugins, nothing. It's just, it works. So I, like with all the ultimate updates and everything, I have no idea. I haven't used any new version of Pro Tools in probably 7 years. So
Dan and I are on the same page here. I use a old version of Pro Tools with a, Mac tower, like one of the last G5 towers. And I do that because I have a version that is stable. And so when you're running, tapes and you might only have one or two plays, stability is paramount. So I actually, it's funny enough, since I've been in Los Angeles, I've been using an updated version of Pro Tools. And it has thrown me for such a weird loop because I'm like, wait a minute, like, where's my clock source? How do I check that? Like, I'm so used to like Pro Tools. I think I'm running 10. Oh, I'm not sure what version I'm running, something 10, on an OS that's old, but it communicates with all of this old shit that we need to communicate with other old shit, like digital stuff from the 90s, et cetera. So if we have a system where it's like, I know that if I get into my session and I've got a bunch of ADATs that need to sync, that I like all of my settings, I know that I'm going to have 100% success rate to get it to sync using this specific setup. And as soon as you upgrade into new Pro Tools, it's almost like the Wild West for us, because we're so used to that stability. And when we hit record and when we hit play, the most important thing is that it records all the way through to the end of that media, because we might only have one go at that. So we can't really mess around with so once we find something that works, it's like, I know Dan and I talk about this a lot. Like, we have our whole computer backed up in case it dies, which it will. I mean, TikTok, right? It's pretty old. To just find another older computer that's in better shape to sort of run, you know what I mean? Just to kind of push that over into a new system. So, upgrades are terrifying. At least for me. I don't mess with it either.
I'm not a big Reaper head, but I've used Reaper enough to know that when you go into record with it, I've had great success with it as a backup to Pro Tools in remote recording situations, where it just keeps going.
Yeah, the joke about Reaper is if somebody uses Reaper, you'll know because they'll tell you. But it's the veganism of digital audio workstation. My
Right.
my wife exclusively uses Reaper because she's able to sort of write her own code for it and have it do things that she wants it to do specifically. And I know that, and there's a Pro Tools skin for it. Everyone always asks what's the best system? What do you use for, what's your software? And I'm like, whatever you feel the most comfortable using is the best.
How often do other DAWs and the restoration of those sessions come up for you? Everything from, Logic prior to Apple owning it and it being on a PC to Cubase, or, what do you run into that at all?
Almost never. All the backup tapes I get are 99% Pro Tools. It's just what everybody used back in the day, like in professional studios. I've really never seen Cubase or old Logic. I have never gotten any of those sessions. It's always just been Pro Tools 4, 5, 6, 7.
I've had this conversation in my head out on the podcast, on various videos. I've even had this conversation with Steve Albini before he died, where I said, well, what if we just backed up and archived everything to proper analog? Steve had some as Steve did, logical argument against, trying to do that. And I think, Dan, I may have hit you up about this at some point.
Yeah, I'm pretty much against it myself too. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and just remind me, why do you think that that's not a viable solution?
There's several reasons why it's not a viable solution. First of all, you're going down a generation. So you're adding tape noise. If it's already on analog and you're backing up to analog, you're adding more tape noise to it. Then you have the price. A 2-inch reel of tape is what, $350?
Mm-hmm.
And if you're at 30 inches per second, that's 17 minutes worth of music on it. If you're at 15 inches per second, you're at 27 minutes of music. And then where are you going to store all this stuff? It takes up a lot of space. If you've ever, Catherine's been to my office.
Yeah.
I have tapes everywhere because they are huge and they weigh a ton. Then the final reason is there's going to be a day where there's no tape machines to play them back on. We're really running up against the clock as far as having viable tape machines. And especially, the parts are skyrocketing. And the people that fix them are, they're either passed away or in Hawaii at this point. You can have all the analog tapes you want, but if you don't have a machine to play them back on, then it's not going to do you any good. And that's what happened. There was a company that took all their music and put it on the 3M 32 track digital machine back in the day. And guess what? There's only one of those machines working that I know of. And they charge some insane amount of money per transfer because they know they're the only ones that have that machine. So, and and that machine looks like it's on its last legs, to be honest.
It's just going to get worse. It's going to become more and more obsolete. That's just the way it's going. Also, if you're going to back everything up to tape, do you know how to properly do that? That's another thing.
There's
Are
that.
you aligning properly? Yeah. So there's a lot of, and Dan's 100% right. As much as like tape would be the most, maybe from what we know, it might last the longest. However, if it's stored properly. However, we don't, like, tape is extremely expensive. Don't ever need to fix anything. And are you doing it properly? Dan had a really good point,
Yeah.
Just keep moving it. Something new comes out, back it up, keep more backups in different places.
Yeah.
That's like, keep it in motion.
Keep it in motion and keep multiple copies in multiple locations.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
because
document where that
if you have if you have 3 copies of it and they're all in your house, and God forbid your house burns down, it's all gone. So the old archiving saying is, if you don't have it on 3 different drives in 3 different locations, it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Yep.
Wow. Okay. Well, this has been great. Have we skipped anything that we should mention before we, close up shop?
Man, I mean, there's so many avenues to go down when it comes to like the world of archiving, which is kind of cool because it's like a topic that can always be revisited, I think, because it's always changing too. We're always running up against weird shit or finding weird things that are happening. And so it's like this continual, I don't know, sure, but also like this information is lovely. Like, all the things we touched on.
Maybe we'll say this is to be continued at another time when we have a whole nother hour of stuff to ruminate on. But one thing that I want to clarify that I'm confused by, we're using this term archiving. In my brain, I've always thought of, you back up something to make multiple copies, and then when you archive it, you're essentially packaging it up for long-term shelf storage. Am I wrong in that? And how are you thinking of archiving when you're using that term?
Well, for me, the reason that I name my company Audio Archiving Services is because I'm preparing your material for an archive. Like, I'm not holding your material and I'm not storing it, because archiving it usually means you're like a curator of a collection of things. But what I'm doing is I'm preparing your material for your archive.
Dan's doing that in a different way than I'm doing it, in a more specific way, which is really, really great. I'm sort of like a little bit of a sort of rogue archivist, where I'll go to where the tapes are, given the circumstances and the environment, and just do the very best that I can. And all of my stuff is it's extremely client based. So where I do have things that I do every single time, templates, and obviously we have fundamentals, there's alignment stuff, there's things that we obviously do every time. I might have a client that's an academia client that is going to request significantly more metadata than, a client that maybe found a couple of tapes in his dad's attic and it's his dad's old band and he just wants to hear it. So like for me, it's all very, very client based. If I'm doing a reissue campaign, I only have a certain amount of time to do it. And based on what that client's asking for, what they're doing with it. So I guess my point is that there's a lot of different types of archivists. There's like archivists that work like exclusively in academia. We were just on a panel with Kabir, who I forget his last name right now because it's, I don't know.
Herman.
Thank you. It's 10:30 at night.
Yeah, it's Kabir Herman. Yeah.
He's incredible. I mean, he works he works at Stanford, and his process is a lot different because it's just strictly academia. Jason Bittner, who's done a lot of audio and video archiving for Harvard, his process is very specific to that. We're doing kind of 2 things at the same time. We're preparing, when we digitize something, that act in itself is preparation for longevity. It's preparation for, posterity, essentially, until there's a new format that might be high resolution, et cetera. So we're doing it high resolution so that it's like, here's the best version of this for what we can provide right now in 2025. So we're preparing, but then we're also saving. We're also, like recovering and saving this audio that otherwise would just die on a shelf or, in a swamp or, something like that. So it's like we're saving this music. We're bringing stuff into the world that in a way almost shouldn't still be available, which is kind of cool. It's the coolest part about archiving. So there's lots of different kinds, I guess, is my point.
Okay. And final question, is there anything format-wise on the horizon that you've seen or have evidence of that you think could be the next level of preservation?
Personally, I haven't seen anything. Also, you don't want to put all your stuff on the bleeding edge of technology either. So if there's a brand new storage medium that just came out, I would usually wait for a couple generations before trusting that media, because you never know something, if it's brand new and kind of untested. I don't know if I'd put all my information on that media. You know, so.
Holograms.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what seems really cool and super great is that digital tape machine that there's only one of now that like somebody has and it barely runs. Like that was the coolest new thing, whatever 1980, whatever, so it's not really any different now. It's just more advanced and much, much smaller, or you can't even see it. So.
Yeah. Well, you kind of have to stay active with it all, but you also have to, I think, exercise a little bit of caution and careful thought about like where you're going to put stuff as it becomes available. Because as you say, one person's like, hey, let's put it all on this one particular machine. And then, 20 years, 25 years later, that whole situation's hosed. So, you gotta like proceed with caution and a little bit of skepticism.
Well, a quick anecdote about the 3M 32-track digital machine. Mm-hmm. The company that backed all their stuff up to that machine sold the machine. That's the one machine that's still around. And they had to pay the company that they sold the machine to transfer all their old stuff. So
that's, on that note, thank you both for staying up with me and doing this deep dive. I think a lot of people will find it eye-opening if they haven't been exposed to it before. So once again, audience, links will be in the show notes to both Dan and Catherine. And thanks again, guys.
Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Always a pleasure, and always a pleasure
Matt.
to be on with Dan. That's an awesome tag team.
Oh,
yeah.
Same with you, Catherine.
Take care.